Hello, all you beautiful people in Webtown, and welcome back to Crypto Comics for a very, very special event this fine day. Today, I am going to read for each and every one of you beautiful people in Webtown my new book, The Young Barbarians, available now on Amazon.com, whether you want a paperback, a hardcover, or that Kindle edition. It's waiting for you there on Amazon.com. And don't forget, you can sign up for the Lost Library newsletter at enterthelostlibrary.com. The Young Barbarians is a fun-filled fantasy adventure, stuffed full of sorcerers, sword fights, goblins, trolls, wolf people, magical potions, and a whole lot more. So let's get started with The Young Barbarians by yours truly. Just so you know, I love sword and sorcery. It's one of my favorite genres. Here we go. Chapter 1. Rain poured down in thick, soggy sheets, splashing across the cedar shakes of the rustic wooden grog shop's roof, drops trickling their way into the hazy tavern and collecting in buckets laid about the creaking, wine-stained floor as the angry oinks of a protesting pig filled the wayside watering hole. The pig was not a pig at all, but a big, nasty, walking, talking warthog the size of a man. Clad in dark chainmail armor and black leather pants with a studded metal patch over its left eye, the man-monster pointed its hog-hoofed hand at a brooding barbarian sat on a bench before it, as spittle flew from its mouth and slobber dripped from its tusks. The big oinker wasn't having any of what the savage swordsman was selling. Brutan, the muscular barbarian with thick lengths of chestnut-colored hair and a heavy broadsword strapped to his rippling back, clanked his iron beer stein on the wooden table before him, ale sloshing out as other patrons laughed and cajoled one another in their drunkenness, ignoring the growing altercation between the beast and the barbarian. "I told you, that's your cut, like it or not," Brutan declared before taking a slurp of his ale, the warthog-faced warrior immediately squealing in protest. "Listen here, pig," Brutan replied. 30 gold pieces is all you earned, so 30 is all you get." Two other warthogs in black battle gear joined the big oinker in snorting angrily at the mighty barbarian. The hog with the leather executioner's mask particularly incensed that Brutan dared call them pigs, a clearly inferior creature destined for the dinner table. "I don't care if you thought it was 30 gold pieces each," Brutan said, cutting them off. "That's not my problem. You don't want me to have a problem, so get some grog and go find a mud hole to roll around in." Brutan gulped down the last remnants of his ale and slammed the stein down on the table, thick froth splashing outward. The one-eyed leader of the warthogs slammed his mace on the table in response, cracking the wood and sending splinters flying. "All right, you got it," Brutan declared as he leapt from his seat. "Let's make some bacon." He socked the warthog leader straight in the snout, sending the animalistic warrior stumbling backward, just as the boar at arms with the executioner's mask swung its mace straight for the barbarian's skull. Brutan knocked the blow aside with his mighty forearm, latched onto the warthog's wrist, and knocked the beast over his shoulder. The squealing swine crashed through a table populated by patrons. The third walking, talking warthog jumped into the fracas, grabbing Brutan's muscular arms from behind and pulling them back. The anthropomorphic animal's eye-patch commander swung its mace directly at Brutan's chiseled face, but the barbarian ducked, and the warthog holding him was smashed unconscious, falling in a heap to the sticky tavern floor. Brutan dealt a fierce kick to the chief warthog's potbelly, causing the beast to bend forward and clutch its abdomen. The warrior from the feudal lands of Barbaria clasped the warthog's shoulder guard with his left hand, holding the big pig in place, and delivered a series of brutal uppercuts with his right that knocked the fat ham silly. The barbarian shouted for an arriving patron to hold the door as he slammed the warthog's snout into the wooden bar over and over, then hurled the dazed creature by the back of its leather pants, straight through the open door and into the watery mud outside, muck flying everywhere as the chief swine touched down. From the doorway, Brutan laughed boisterously and shouted to the sludge-covered hog, "There you go! Just as I said! Have a good root!" Brutan walked back inside, ordered another ale, and sat down to enjoy the rest of his evening. "Undisturbed," the boy declared as he sat across the campfire from a half-inebriated Brutan in the midst of a lush forevergreen forest, growing along a moonlit ocean shore. "Mighty Brutan wins again." Brutan nodded and took a pull from his wineskin before saying, "That's right, boy." The barbarian burped long and loud. the vino he'd been drinking while telling campfire tales of his past exploits, finally catching up to him for the night. Nix, the slightly chubby 12-year-old Aquanese boy with light skin, brown hair, and hazel eyes, clothed in a brown tunic and matching pants, with a forest green shirt beneath, looked across the crackling campfire to his hero, mesmerized. He asked, "Have you ever lost a fight, Brutan?" The barbarian responded, "Not that I live to tell about." Nix contemplated that answer, looking to his other friends around the fire to see if it made sense to them. There was Flicker, another 12-year-old Aquanese boy with light skin, bright blue eyes, and brown hair that matched his furry outfit. He nearly always had a smile on his face, and never met a forest animal he didn't like. But this night, he just looked tired, offering only a yawn in response. Shadow, the final member of their young trio, was also the same age, but of Aquanian descent. He had dark, short-cropped hair and brown eyes that matched his skin tone. He was garbed in a gray and purple cleric's outfit, with a dark gray cloak worn over it. Nix thought he also looked tired, which made no sense to the boy, as Brutan was the greatest warrior to ever pass through their Aquan village, and he himself could easily stay up till morning was there and gone again, listening to the barbarians' tales. Sitting alongside the boys at the campfire were Flicker's 6-year-old twin siblings, Cricket and Sundrop, and Nix's 4-year-old brother Niblet, who was just as eager as his big brother to hear the barbarians' war stories, as he'd been listening to Nix tell tales about the strength and skill of the Savage Champion since the moment he'd been born. Sitting in between them all was Poppy, a delightful 11-year-old Aquanian girl with sandy blonde hair and big brown eyes. She enjoyed Nix's enthusiasm for adventure, but could never quite understand why any Aquan would dream of becoming a barbarian so that they might travel to distant lands and engage in battles over treasures and princesses. By Poppy's way of thinking, there was more than enough to explore within the forevergreen forests, high atop the cliffs that the Aquanians had inhabited since the time before time. And it was much safer there, too. Nix, not tired one bit, continued encouraging the barbarian to share another of his timeless tales. "Now, Brutan, I was telling my friends here how you didn't just fight for King Brannigan, but how you fought alongside him." Always eager to brag about his exploits, especially after emptying a wine sack or two, Brutan boasted proudly, I did indeed, boy. Me and Brannigan and a horde of Runegard soldiers against the whole of the Warnocked army. Pushed them all the way back, we did, all the way into the land of the 20 tribes. Sent the bravest running for Warnocked Mountain, and saved the Quartz Castle, Nix added, and Merowin. Saved the whole of Runegard, I did, Brutan bragged, taking another swig off his wineskin before plopping onto his side on the grass and getting comfortable for the evening. The whole of Runegard. Wow. Nix was beside himself, then suddenly realized how inexperienced he was in comparison, commenting, "I've never even seen Runegard." Shadow replied in his Aquanian accent, sounding very much like what the children of Earth would call an Australian. "We've never even been to Treetop, Nix, and that's just at the bottom of the cliffs." Nix shot back in his Aquanese dialect, which Earthlings might consider sounding remarkably similar to an American accent from the Pacific Coast. "Someday, Shadow, someday we're gonna..." "Yeah, you'll see it from a boat," Flicker declared, reminding Nix of the future already intended for him by the alders of the Aquan community. Nix looked sour, replying with a blend of disdain and disappointment. "I don't want to be a mariner, though. Fishing is so stupid." "You don't ever say that come supper time," Shadow retorted, bringing up his friend's frequently eager appetite. Before the husky member of the boyish trio could respond, Flicker reminded him, "But Nix, you're meant to be a fisherman. The alders made their decision." Shadow added, "Yeah, that's what growing up and becoming a man is all about. I'm supposed to be a shadow walker. Flicker here's an animal whisperer. And you, Nix, you're a mariner. You'll be a bountiful fisherman one day." "But I don't want to be a fisherman," Nix declared angrily. "I want to be a barbarian, like mighty Brutan." He gestured to Brutan, who had already passed out from the vino he'd been drinking. The barbarian belched in his sleep, then squeezed his wine sack tighter to his chest, cuddling with it by the fire. Nix shrugged off the lingering suspicion that his hero might have a bit of a drinking problem as Poppy rose to her feet, saying, "Thank you for sharing your barbarian friend with us, Nix. It was quite fun. I'll see you all tomorrow." "Good night, Poppy," Nix replied. "Night, Poppy," Shadow added as the girl walked toward the inviting wooden cottages in the distance, smoke softly billowing from their stone chimneys, and warm glows coming from within their small, crooked windows. After a long yawn that included a big stretch, Flicker declared, "I've heard enough barbarian stories for one night. I'll see you guys tomorrow." He put his hands on the heads of his younger siblings, rubbing their hair sweetly. "Come on, Cricket. Time for bed, Sundrop." The two children followed him away from the fire, leaving Nix to have a good stretch of his own and spread out on the grass, fantasizing about the adventures he so wished to have one day as he uttered the name of his hero once more. Mighty Brutan. Shadow stood over him, looking down questioningly, with hands on hips. "You really going to sleep out here again? You know we've got apprenticeship school tomorrow." Sleep overcoming him and forcing out another yawn, Nix responded softly, "I don't want to be a fisherman. Smell of fish all day and night?" Shadow couldn't help but identify with that train of thought. "Got a point there, Pally." Nix looked up to him with sincerity and asked, "Why can't we pick what we want to be, Shadow? It's not fair." Shadow provided the only answer his 12-year-old mind could summon at that late hour. "It's just the way it's always been, I guess. The olders are wise men. They've been around the longest, so I reckon they know what's best for every Aquan." Nix turned on his side, ready for bed, and commented back, "I guess. I just wish we could leave the cliffs for once and go on an adventure. A great quest, like King Brannigan of Runeguard." Shadow knew what was coming next and said the words in unison with his friend. "And mighty Brutan." He concluded their conversation, saying, "Sleep well, Nix. I'll see you in the morrow." "Good night, Shadow," Nix said with his eyes closed as the dark-skinned Aquanian left him by the fire and returned home. Nix smiled, uttering the name of mighty Brutan under his breath one final time before drifting into unconsciousness. He dreamed of the great adventures to be had in the vast lands that lay beyond the safety of the cliffs, which the Aquans had dwelled upon since the time before time. According to the Alders who governed both bands of Aquans, they were once two distinctly different people, one tribe from the rolling western hills of Etrinia and Caledorn, the other from the ancient civilization that resided in the land of Runeguard, long before Brannigan's ancestors rose to power and forged an everlasting alliance with the Magi of Merowyn. While the knowledge of which of those four far-off civilizations their families had originally come from had long since been lost to time, Nix was always fascinated by the idea that some of their forefathers had actually been mystical magicians from Merowyn who'd led the eastern tribe to the forests and fields that lay atop the cliffs along the northern sea of the planet Magistus. Over many generations, the social customs and spiritual beliefs of the two separate tribes melded into one beautiful and harmonious civilization. Yet their differences in speech and skills remained intact, with one tribe confining much of itself to the forests, and the other remaining in the fields, where their families had tilled the soil and tended the orchards for perhaps 1,000 years or more. Aquanese, like Nix and Flicker, typically provided their community with the freshwater fish of the sea and the flavorful fruits of the fields, while their Aquanian counterparts, like Shadow, lived and hunted within the forevergreen forests of the cliffs and had a modest penchant for earth magic. Where the two tribes came together at the center of the cliffs nearest the sea, the people blended and mixed freely, resulting in a wide range of youngsters entering a variety of trades as they grew into adulthood. Nix, most unfortunately, was chosen to become a mariner by the Alders who governed the whole of Aquania from their central village of Lumiere. Quite an exciting job for a boy who despised the smell of any fish that wasn't smoked on a cedar plank. In his dreams, though, Nix wasn't just a boy destined to become a measly fisherman. He was riding alongside Brutan and Brannigan, charging into battle to save a beautiful blue-eyed princess from an alliance of necromancers who'd abducted her from the quartz castle before setting their sights on the overthrow of Runeguard itself. Chapter 2.
"Wake up, you supple young lad!"
Needless to say, the gravelly voice of a salty mariner demanding his presence at the boat docks was a most unwelcomed. Needless to say, the gravelly voice of a salty mariner demanding his presence at the boat docks was most unwelcomed in the heroic hallucinations that sleep had brought to the boy. Nix's eyes flashed open, and his head darted to the gristly, unwashed fisherman who had so rudely awakened him. The mariner gave him a push with his worn leather boot and declared,
"The sea calls your name."
Nix groaned at the thought of another day chopping off fish heads, then looked to Brutan through the gray smoke drifting up from the long-since dead fire. The barbarian was gone, off on another fantastic voyage, no doubt. Under his breath, Nix whispered, "Fizzlewick." The mariner, still standing over him, responded,
Get on it, boy. We've got fish to get.
Nix looked disgusted as he rose to his feet and scanned the village for any sign of a friendly face. He spotted a girl walking toward a pack of young huntresses gathered at the edge of the woods, with the High Ranger responsible for their apprenticeship training. Nix called out to her, "Isley! Good morning!" 12 years old, with a bright smile, long brunette hair and a braided ponytail, and invitingly warm lagoon blue eyes, Isley was one of those unique few born of mixed Aquanian and Aquanese heritage. Her mother descended from a long line of respected forest archers who'd represented their village in the Alderhall generations before, and her father was 28th of his ilk to tend the heavenly-smelling fruit fields that sprawled between her mother's familial village and the ancient orchard to the west of the central town of Lumiere. It was here where the two separate tribes first came together in the time before time, to become one people, and where Nix and his fellow Aquans had been born and raised many centuries later. Nix couldn't help smiling when he heard Isley's voice, the two tongues of their people blending perfectly to create what he thought might be the sweetest sound one could ever hear. It was what an earthling might identify most closely with the fairy-like tone of their own chilly Icelandic people, perhaps best known for their cold temperatures and warm hearts. "Good morning, Nix. Are you ready for this beautiful day?" Isley motioned to the bright blue sky and two moons still visible over the northern sea at the edge of Lumiere. Nix looked to the heavens and smiled, responding, "It is beautiful, huh?" Isley said genuinely, "I wouldn't want to live anywhere other than Aquania." Nix contemplated this statement for a good 3 seconds before replying, "But we've never seen anywhere else." The next thing the boy knew, the salty fisherman was pulling him toward the docks by his shirt while hollering,
"Enough flirting, boy. Those fish won't chop their own heads off."
Nix made a sour face, then shouted to Isley, "See you at dinner?" Isley smiled and nodded, her lips opening to say something. Zara, a 17-year-old Aquanian huntress with short sandy blonde hair, stopped Isley from getting the words out as she called from the pack of apprentices at the edge of the woods, "Come on, Isley! Time for the hunt!" Nix watched the girl walk away for a fleeting moment before turning his attention to the rugged old barnacle dragging him out to sea. As they approached the docks, Nix couldn't help but wonder what she was going to say before Zara had cut her off. The question had little time to linger in his mind, as he had a day filled with fishermanly duties ahead. Meanwhile, beneath the massive forevergreen trees, Flicker sat cross-legged on the forest floor, perfectly silent. His instructors and fellow animal whisperer apprentices watched on from a distance, quietly hiding behind the ancient cedars as a squirrel hesitantly approached the boy extending his hand. The squirrel sniffed him for quite some time, which Flicker was happy to accommodate. Once he passed his furry friend's smell test, Flicker carefully produced a nut from the pouch he wore on his belt. The squirrel was slow in taking the first almond, but by the end of the second nut, he was hopping onto Flicker's knee and chirping up a storm. Flicker petted the little critter, then handed him another nut and gently lifted his new friend to his shoulder, where the creature was content to remain, eating nut after nut. Behind the trees, his instructors smiled and gave him a thumbs up, while the other apprentices whispered excitedly about how easily Flicker had done what they all thought would be hard. As the other up-and-coming animal whisperers were slowly approaching Flicker and the squirrel, Shadow was earning his namesake in the caves of contemplation, where all hopeful shadow walkers learn their secret craft by candlelight. As he and his fellow apprentices followed their instructors through the dimly lit caverns, Shadow darted into the darkness, disappearing from sight. The instructors smiled and told the children that the hunt was on, to see if they could catch a shadow. The young apprentices went scurrying through the tunnels in search of the would-be shadow walker. While some tried to make noise to lure him out, others crept quietly around the rocks, peering into every darkened corner they could find, except for the one he was hiding in, which they unwittingly passed by. He leapt out and scared them all, earning a positive nod from the onlooking instructors and increasing his confidence in his own abilities. In the woods to the west of the Caves of Contemplation, Isley and Zara practiced their hunting skills on targets erected by the rangers. Isley's ability with the bow was undeniable, her lineage playing a strong role in her destiny, and Zara had become a future legend among the younger children for her abilities with a spear. Her talents were only exceeded by the much more experienced, all-male warriors of the Lancer Brigade and the Ranger Guild, the capstone of which was the elite High Ranger Society, who were the only Aquans to regularly journey past the vast forests growing far below the cliffs of Aquania. After proving their precision to the High Ranger instructing their group, Isley and Zara stepped to the side, taking note of the young male warriors practicing through the trees 100-odd paces away. Zara couldn't take her eyes off Griffin, a 17-year-old Aquanian lancer with shaggy brown hair and a toned build, whom she privately insisted may not be the tallest of the warriors, but was certainly the friendliest, and probably the most handsome. Griffin lunged forward, throwing a lance the length of his forearm through a tree. The lance's handle never left his hand, the force of the throw causing the weapon's blade to separate and embed itself in the trunk of the tree. A long, thick chain extended from the kunai blade buried in the tree to the handle of the weapon still in Griffin's hand. He yanked with all his might, pulling the blade free and sending tree bark flying into the air. Despite the other young warriors cheering him on as they watched with excitement, Griffin instinctively sensed foreign eyes gazing at him. He swiveled his head and peered through the woods, instantly locking eyes with Zara. His commander was quick to regain his attention.
Griffin, something caught your eye, young brave?
Griffin immediately turned to his tutor, head lowered, and replied,
Apologies, sir.
Zara and Isley giggled softly at Griffin being reprimanded, only for them to be caught not paying attention by the High Ranger responsible for their instruction.
Found some game to hunt there, Zara?
Zara, usually not one to blush, felt her cheeks start to turn rosy. She quickly put on a serious face before responding, Not at all, High Ranger. Thank you for your lessons today, sir. The most elite of the Aquanians' fighting class looked at her stone-faced as he replied, Perhaps you can divine why there are no female rangers, young lady. Zara's eyes burned angrily at the slight, but she quickly lowered her head to hide it. The High Ranger returned his attention to his apprentices, which would only serve to make the fire inside her burn with greater intensity and increase her unyielding commitment to her craft ever the more. On the docks, Nyx was trying to come up with a way to convince the Alders, whom he'd never actually spoken to outside of when they had declared him a mariner's apprentice, to let him switch his craft to anything that didn't involve fish. He'd never heard of that happening in the past, but figured that there was a first time for everything, despite Aquan's general resistance to change. He lifted a sharpened metal cleaver into the air, turned his head away, and chopped off a fish's head. Disgusting, he muttered as he pushed the fish with the end of his cleaver into a barrel filled with the slippery things, preferring very much not to touch the headless ones with his bare hands. As he grabbed another fish and set it on the chopping block, the salty mariner in charge called out for his help. Nyx, grateful to be off head chopping duty, even if only for a few minutes, rushed to his instructor standing on the deck of a sailboat that had just come in with a fresh catch. Precariously perched on the edge of the fishing vessel, Nyx held his arms out wide as the gristly, stinky mariners swung their nets stuffed full of fish toward the dock behind the boy. All he had to do was help the two men standing alongside him guide the net down to the dock, where the fish would be offloaded for boys like him to chop their heads off. But instead of taking it easy, the sailors swung the net with vigor, and it slammed into Nyx, knocking him off the boat's gunwale and into the water below head first. He bobbed up and spat out a mouthful of water, then slapped his hands on the surface of the sea and shouted, Fizzlewick! The boisterous cackles of the salty mariner instructing him, and the sailors fresh in from sea caught his attention, and Nyx looked up to the boat. His blood boiled as they pointed and laughed heartily at his foolishness. He moved toward the shore, the sound of his smelly instructor calling after him,
That'll be enough for today, boy. Run home to your mummy and get a fresh change of clothes. Perhaps we'll make a man out of you tomorrow.
A large bonfire crackled invitingly as the first of the world's twin suns neared the northern sea's horizon. Dusk soon to overtake Aquania. Shadow, Flicker, and Poppy were just sitting down with their meals at one of the circular tables near the fire. A nightly smorgasbord was prepared by culinary apprentices and their younger siblings not old enough for training, which they all partook in together to strengthen the bonds of both family and Aquan society. Poppy, eager to start her training in anything the Alders chose for her, wanted to hear every detail of their day's experiences.
How was apprenticeship today? I can't wait to find out what I'll be doing for mine when I'm old enough next year. It must be great.
The sound of Nyx's exasperated and angry voice caught the attention of them all. I hate it! They turned in their chairs to discover the soaking wet boy approaching their table. Shadow mumbled in surprise at the sight of their drenched friend. Well, I'll be a goblin's uncle. Flicker, knowing Nyx too well, asked with assumption in his voice, You fell in again? Nyx splashed down into a chair next to them and shouted miserably, Yes! And all those old barnacle growers were laughing at me. Could have been worse, Shadow declared. Riverbone could have been there to see it. Nyx's eyes twitched at the sound of his most hated and feared enemy. Riverbone Salamand was an Aquanese boy only slightly older than them, but nearly a whole head taller. For some reason that Nyx never understood, Riverbone had chosen him out of all the children of Aquania to be the prime target of his bullying, which the red-haired rapscallion was remarkably good at, having provided Nyx with many fresh lumps on his head and more than his share of embarrassment in front of other apprentices. Poppy handed Nyx a fresh roll already stuffed with butter and said,
Have some dinner, Nyx. It'll be all right.
Flicker agreed, saying, Yeah, Nyx, you'll get the hang of it eventually.
No, I won't. They treat me like a bog baby,
Nyx said sadly and sincerely as he pulled off a piece of the roll and stuffed it in his mouth. Griffin approached the table with a heaping plate of food, famished from his day of training for that far-off time when a fight might finally come to the cliffs. Hello, boys. His train of thought was derailed at the sight of the soaking wet and gloomy-looking boy chewing angrily on the doughy roll. Griffin asked quite frankly as he sat down,
Nyx, what's got you looking like a bog baby?
Nyx responded with great rage,
I'm not a bog baby, Griffin!
Griffin looked to the others, surprised by the sudden outburst. Before he could come up with something to say, Nyx eked out, But I'd rather be a bog baby than a stupid mariner. The boy stuffed the remainder of the roll into his mouth and chewed it down. Flicker remarked, Don't worry about it, Griffin. He's just having trouble adjusting. Griffin replied,
Oh, well, don't worry about it, Nyx.
The orders chose you to be a fisherman for a reason.
Yeah, so I could look like a fool in front of everybody, Nyx said through a mouthful of buttery bread. Nah, falling in the water's all a part of it, Griffin said, determined to raise the boy's spirits. I had to fall 100 times. No, 1,000 times. Before I became a real warrior. Yeah, but you don't even have to fight anyone, Griffin, the boy replied. There's never been any fighting on the cliffs. How do you know you'll be able to do it? Confident in himself, Griffin retorted,
It's just something inside you, I think. Something that makes you have to stand up and fight to hold on to what you love.
The idea of a potential battle brought Nyx's hero to mind, and he responded, Yeah, but Brutan? He's been in real fights, not just training, and he says there's a lot of cowards who turn tail and run when the battle rages. Griffin gave Nyx a clap on the back with one hand as he grabbed a chicken leg from his wooden plate with the other.
Well, my kindred, hopefully Aquania will never have to find out. That's the first thing you learn when you're selected for Lancer Brigade. You never long for a fight. You only fight because there's no other way to protect what you hold dear.
Yeah, I guess so. I can see that. Nyx looked around the village, his eyes searching for someone as his interest in the topic of apprenticeships waned. Where's Isley? Probably finishing up her huntress lessons, Flicker replied.
The Rangers run the hunting apprenticeship, same as Lancer training. You don't go until the work is done. Never mind the dinner you smell carried on the wind.
Nyx asked the question that Griffin himself had been quietly searching for an answer to for many months. How long before you can join the Ranger Guild, Griffin?
High Ranger said I was too thin and too short,
the toned 17-year-old explained as he sunk his teeth into the chicken leg. Examining Griffin's body, Nyx replied,
Too thin? You look great, though.
Thanks, Griffin said after glugging down some razzleberry juice.
I figure after a couple years as a Lancer, I'll bulk up and try again. Might look taller if I pack on some muscle.
Before he could take another bite of chicken, a great commotion came from the woods 100 paces away, catching Griffin's attention.
What's this now?
They turned from the table to witness Zara, Isley, and the other hunters and huntresses stream out of the woods, the young apprentices and their instructors helping a horde of disheveled and weakened strangers toward the village. Zara called out with a hint of desperation in her voice, Griffin, come quickly! He took to his feet and ran toward them before the boys at the table could even comprehend what was happening. After a moment, they rose and followed along. Chapter 3. The collection of Aquans and strangers were in disarray as Griffin reached Zara and Isley, his eyes exploring the faces of the people pouring out of their normally quiet forest.
What's happened here, Zara? Who are these people?
We don't know, she answered. They came out of the woods, out of nowhere.
It's not possible,
he replied, looking to her with confused skepticism, eager to sort out the unfolding situation before he let his guard down.
There's no one else who lives here. No way to get up the cliffs without the ranger's permission.
The voice of an elderly stranger called out, Help us! They turned as a sickly, unshaven old man with stringy white hair and tarnished clothes stumbled toward them, collapsing into Griffin's arms. He uttered weakly, We barely escaped with our lives.
Escape from where? Griffin asked. There's nowhere to have come from. Only Aquans inhabit these woods.
Through a portal, the sickly stranger replied. Our shaman opened it, sent us through. That must be a powerful wizard indeed, Zara said as they helped the suffering people into their village.
Most assuredly he is.
The weak man motioned toward the tables around the bonfire where they'd been eating dinner only a moment before and muttered,
Come, let me rest.
They helped the suffering man to a seat at the table as adult Aquans rushed around them, helping the strangers find comfort. Griffin turned to the forest, pulling his lance, and asked, Are there enemies in our woods, stranger? The sickly old man replied,
No, not in the woods.
Griffin lowered his weapon, only to hear the old man slither through his yellow teeth.
They are among you.
The stranger cackled sinisterly and threw his hands back before shooting into the air on a billow of black smoke. The young Aquans watched in frozen shock as the disheveled old man with the stringy white hair hovered above them, the charcoal-colored smoke spinning upward and twisting around him, enveloping him completely before dissipating to reveal his true form. A sickly, pale white figure in burnt and torn black robes, with a bald head and skin so translucent his blue veins were visible through it. The vile-looking warlock shouted from atop the billow of black smoke in a necromantic tongue, Nechat Ringoa Blerendu! Reveal your true form, my snapping beasts! Smoke shot out in every direction from the billowing black tower at his feet, engulfing each of the unkempt strangers on the ground who'd come to the Aquan village under the guise of seeking refuge. The necromancer shouted secret dark words once more. Nonter domnoac trinter effissimo. The black smoke whipping around each of the strangers swiftly shot back into the billow at the wicked warlock's feet, revealing the intruders to not be human at all, but sandstone-colored crocodile men with thick chains and whips on their belts, each of them clad in armor made of iron and gold, adorned with gems glittering red and green. They snapped and snatched at the peaceful Aquan villagers, who were no match for the superior strength of the crocodile men. Shackle them, their pale leader shouted from the sky. Quickly! While some of the crocodile men used their chains to subdue the Aquan villagers, others battled the lancers and rangers, fighting back to free their people from bondage. Griffin turned to Nyx and the other young apprentices, rapidly shouting instructions. Get all of the children into the caves! They won't know to look there! Hurry! Zara pulled her spear as Nyx, Flicker, Shadow, Isley, and Poppy ran to gather the smaller children and get them to safety. Go with the young ones, Griffin instructed her. Defend them with your life if they come into harm's way. She boldly refused, replying, I'm staying to fight. We need every skilled Aquan to repel these monsters. Griffin shook his head in disagreement and ran into battle, knowing this was no time for a debate. Zara chased after him, her face set with determination to save her village. And each and every one of you beautiful people in Webtown can read the rest of the story in The Young Barbarians, available now on Amazon.com in print or digital form. For all my crypto knights out there, it's only 99 cents for a short time only. And please, if you like it, give me a 5-star review, despite my modest grammatical mistakes, which have become glaringly obvious as I have read through the first act of this book here with all you beautiful people today. Thank you so much. And you know what? I think I might come back next week and maybe read another book from the Lost Library. Until then, know that your boy Crypto loves each and every one of you beautiful people in Webtown. And I appreciate you spending your time listening to me.